Hey everyone, so the Ford F150 Raptor, this is the truck that started the high performance off-road craze. Now originally Ford was talking about possibly bringing back the Lightning, but they decided to go a very different route. They decided to go with a high performance off-road truck rather than a high performance on-road truck. Now, while this is badged as an F-150, and this does share a lot of components with the standard F-150, there are a lot of differences between an F-150 and an F-150 Raptor. They are designed for two completely different tasks, and today I want to go over the main differences between your standard F-150 and your F-150 Raptor. Now, I'm going to be concentrating primarily on the second generation Raptor, which is 2017 to 2020. That is part of the 13th generation F-150, 2015 to 2020. Some of this information will bleed over a little bit to the first and third generation Raptors, but this is going to be primarily the 13th generation F-150 that I'm going to be concentrating on today. Now, obviously, the backbone to any truck is going to be the chassis. This is the biggest and strongest component that helps tie everything together. And this is one of the main differences between your standard F-150 and your F-150 Raptor. This chassis is designed to survive high-speed off-road punishment, something that a standard F-150 is not designed for. Essentially, what was happening on some of the early first-generation trucks is some owners that were not afraid to use their trucks for their intended purpose were actually starting to bend the chassis. They did make some reinforcement changes for the later first-gen trucks, but basically with these second-gen trucks, Ford took what they learned from those first-generation chassis and applied all that to this chassis from the factory. What you have here is an extensively modified, heavily reinforced chassis with a lot of doubled-up steel, and it is extremely strong and stiff compared to a regular F-150. Now, the drivetrain does have a lot of similarities from a regular F-150, but there are some significant differences as well. The transmission basically the same as your later 13th generation F-150s, your 10R80 10-speed automatic transmission. No real changes there. The transfer case does have some differences to it. Some of the higher spec F-150s had this same transfer case. What was nice about this transfer case is you had the option for all-wheel drive or automatic four-wheel drive. So essentially what it has in the transfer case is a clutch pack. So rather than having to choose between two-wheel drive and four-wheel drive, you can put it in automatic for the situations that don't necessarily warrant full four-wheel drive, but it's a little bit too slippery for just two-wheel drive. So basically the computer decides when it needs two-wheel drive and when it needs four-wheel drive, and it will basically jump in and out on its own utilizing that clutch pack in the transfer case. Now the axles for the most part are basically the same. The front half shafts are a little bit beefed up, designed to survive the extra heat from off-road driving compared to the basic half shafts on your regular F-150. But the axles for the most part are the same. What's the big difference in this drivetrain are the differentials. Now your standard F-150, even if you get four-wheel drive, Ford either has electronic lockers or unlimited slips front and rear. So if you get a four-wheel drive truck and don't get lockers on it, you essentially have a two-wheel drive truck. You can opt in a regular F-150 for either an electronic locking rear differential independently, or you can get it as part of FX4. That kind of makes it like a three-wheel drive truck, but you still have an unlimited slip front differential. So since energy always follows the path of least resistance, it's always going to go to the wheel that is slipping primarily. With this truck, this is true four-wheel drive. You have an electronic locking differential in the rear, just like on an FX4 F-150. But the front on the higher spec trucks like an 802 or was also available as a standalone option, you had a Torsen limited slip mechanical differential. So basically what would happen is when you were going off-road, you could lock the rear end when you put in four-wheel drive, and if the one front wheel would start to slip, it would mechanically lock the differential and it would engage both tires up front. So you wouldn't have energy just follow the path of least resistance and go to the tire that was slipping. It would automatically, when one started slipping, it would lock the other side up mechanically, and you would have true four-wheel drive. So that kind of gave this drivetrain an edge over the standard F-150. And to protect the drivetrain, that was also another significant difference on this truck. Now with FX4 F-150s, you could get some skid plates to protect the underbody of this truck. They were pretty basic. Some of them were metal, some of them weren't. With this thing, you basically have metal for everything from the transfer case forward. You have metal skid plates. Some of them are a little bit on the thinner side. The front is the main skid plate. It's really a bash guard on the front. That's pretty thick. And then you have a lot of metal. You do have a plastic skid plate under the fuel tank, but you have a lot more metal underneath this truck to help protect it from anything getting kicked up, especially if you were doing some high-speed off-road driving. Now, all of the second generation Raptors were specified to have the same 3.5 liter high output twin turbo V6. Ford claimed this was essentially a detuned version of the engine that came in the Ford GT supercar. Now, a lot of people didn't like this engine simply because of the sound it made, but it did offer a significant power increase from the outgoing 6.2-liter V8 that it replaced. Now, this engine was not available in most of the regular F-150s. The only way you could get the high output version of this engine in a regular F-150 was in the 19 and 20 F-150 Limited, and also the Lincoln Navigator. Those are the only other vehicles from Ford Motor Company that offered this high output engine. However, the standard F-150, you could get the standard 3.5-liter twin-turbo V6. They had done several different generations of that engine, and towards the end of the 13th generation F-150, power in that engine was up to 375 horsepower and 470 pounds of torque. So that was a very strong, very potent engine. This engine, 450 horsepower and 510 pounds of torque. So there was a significant power increase with this engine. The main difference between that engine was some of the early versions of the standard 3.5 did not have both port and direct injection. This has both. Nice thing about that is this can make sure that there's plenty of fuel for this engine, even when you're running at high boost. And having port injection means that the valves do not get dirty and gunked up as they would in a direct injection only engine. That's really nice. And this also has bigger turbochargers on it. So that's the main places where the power increase comes from. Those two main differences compared to the standard 3.5 liter. Now, even though this engine does have a significant power increase over the standard 3.5 that comes in the regular F-150, this truck is not any faster, primarily because this truck is significantly heavier. Because of all the off-road goodies that Ford puts on this, the tires, the chassis, the suspension, the skid plates, all that stuff adds up to about a 700-pound difference when you compare the same body and cab configurations. So even though you have a significant power increase, you're really not any faster than a regular F-150 is going to be. But you do have a significant power increase compared to the standard 3.5 liter in the regular F-150. Now, the biggest difference between your standard F-150 and your F-150 Raptor is going to be the suspension system. This is the system that allows you to go off-road at high speed and still maintain good control of this truck. You have about 13 inches of suspension travel in the front and about 14 inches in the rear. Compare that to about 8 inches of suspension travel on your standard F-150. Now, from a componentry standpoint, the biggest difference is going to be the Fox Racing shocks that all F-150s are designed to have from the factory. These shocks are significantly stronger and more capable than a regular F-150 shock absorber is going to be. The bodies are strengthened, so you're much less likely to have a blowout on these shocks if you experience a high-speed impact or you shock load them. The internal components are strengthened, so you're much less likely to bend them. You also have remote fluid reservoirs and internal bypasses. So essentially what that means is you can run these shocks for extended periods of time and really work them to their maximum capacity without breaking them or overheating them. A standard shock absorber is not designed to take anywhere near the punishment that these shock absorbers are designed to handle. These are also fully rebuildable. If you do ever get to the point where you wear these shocks out, you can have them sent out and rebuilt and put the same shocks back on to the original truck that they came off of. Now, also part of the suspension is you have much softer springs on this truck. Versus a regular F-150 with much stiffer suspension, it's not going to absorb a lot of the bumps. It's going to transfer them into the passenger compartment and give you a much more jarring ride, especially off-road. With this being softer, this is able to absorb a lot of the energy from hitting any sort of bumps when you're going off-road on this truck. And when you put this whole package together, the shocks, the springs, the long travel of the suspension, this means that this truck eats up bumps with ease. On-road or off-road, whether you're going over speed bumps, train tracks, whether you're off-road, going over obstacles, it makes the truck ride very smooth. Whether you're going low speed or high speed, it really does a phenomenal job absorbing a lot of those bumps that would be very jarring in a regular F-150. However, with all this incredible suspension capabilities, you pay an enormous penalty in your payload and towing. A standard F-150 is going to have a significantly higher payload and towing capacity compared to this truck would have. A regular F-150 can tow up to about 12,000 pounds, whereas the Raptors are up to only about 8,000 pounds. The payload on an F-150 can be about 3,000, up to about 3,000 pounds, depending on your bed and cab configuration, whereas the Raptors is only about 1,000 pounds. So having that soft suspension is really great for when you need it, but when it comes to towing and hauling, you pay an enormous penalty compared to what a regular F-150 is capable of doing. Now, wheels and tires are another place where the Raptor has a major off-road advantage compared to a regular F-150. All Raptors are specified to have a set of 35-inch tires from the factory as the stock tire. These are BF Goodrich all-terrain KO2 tires. These are 315, 70, 17-inch tires. You have a nice tall sidewall. Not only does that also help absorb bumps like the suspension system, but it's going to be able to allow the tire to flex and to really grab onto any obstacles that the truck might be trying to go over. You'll also have a much knobbier surface of the tire. That's also going to help it to bite and to really grab onto the whatever terrain that the truck might be going over. This is much better articulation and a lot more grab than a standard low-profile street tire is going to have that comes on most of your standard F-150s. You also have a 17-inch rim. You have the standard cast wheel that the truck comes with. This truck has the optional forged beadlock capable wheel on it. So this wheel is forged, meaning it is much stronger. There's a lot more metal here, so you're much less likely to bend this rim if you take a very high-speed impact on it. And this trim ring can come off, and you can purchase another ring from Ford and make this a true bead lock wheel if you want to go that route. So that's a nice option to have from the factory. Now, these trucks do have the same brakes as a standard F-150. Unfortunately, having a 17-inch rim means there's only so big of a rotor and caliper pair that you can put underneath the rim. So the brakes are basically the same as a standard F-150 is going to be, just mainly because they were restricted by the size of the rim itself. Now, from the exterior of the truck, obviously, the Raptors are dramatically different from your standard F-150. They do share the same cab, but beyond that, that's pretty much where the similarities end. Different hoods, different front fascias, different fenders, quarter panels, running boards, the rear tailgate of the truck. Everything is pretty much different on these trucks. If you put a regular F-150 next to a Raptor, it's almost hard to believe they started off from the same truck. So from the front of the trucks, obviously the big Ford across the grille, that's a pretty well-known feature. That's a very common aftermarket upgrade that a lot of people do to a lot of regular F-150 that was not available from the factory. Same thing with the running lights on the front. You're starting to see that on a lot of other non-Ford vehicles just because that was such a popular option. You had a lot of grille opening here to help this engine breathe. The headlights were unique to the Raptors, the color and the setup that they were. The hoods have this functional heat extractor on the top, obviously Raptor only. And from the sides of the truck, obviously the most notable thing is the fenders and the quarter panels. Obviously Raptor specific to help incorporate the larger wheels and tires. This truck is about 7 inches wider than a regular F-150. That's why they have to have the marker lights on the front grille. That was required by the federal government on the trucks. When you walk around the truck, you really see, the vents on the actual fenders themselves. The running boards are Raptor specific. The aluminum alloy running boards on the truck as you start to walk around it. Same thing on the rear. You see this nice, big, beautiful quarter panel on the rear of the truck. And just like on the front of the truck, you have the big Ford splashed across the tailgate. Another Raptor-only aspect for this truck. And also, the bumper was specific as well as the dual exhaust tips. This was all Raptor-only stuff. And this gave this truck such a commanding presence over any regular pickup truck. Even a regular F-150, any other pickup trucks, the large size, width, height of this truck really made it stand out in the crowd. You could not mistake a Raptor for anything else, whether it was near or far, still or moving. You could always tell a Raptor from really any other pickup truck. Now, the interior of the Raptor does share a lot of similarity with the standard F-150. Since these are based on the same cab, the overall setup and layout is pretty much the same. Your orientation for your buttons, for your infotainment system, your climate controls, your shifter, a lot of the buttons on the steering wheel, all that stuff is pretty much the same since it's based off of an F-150. But like some of the higher trim F-150s, like your King Ranches, your Platinums, your Limiteds, they have different themes on the inside, and this truck is no different. Obviously, this being a performance truck, this has a much sportier theme on the inside. When you climb into these Raptors, first thing you notice is the seats have much more aggressive bolstering on the seats compared to a regular F-150. So when you are off-road or going at high speed, it kind of keeps you in place. This truck has the optional Recaro interior on it, the blue accent group. So this has a little bit more aggressive of a Recaro seat on it, and paired to that with the sporty theme, this has the carbon fiber package, standard with the Recaro Blue Accent Group. The carbon fiber package was available as a standalone option on these Gen 2 Raptors. So the overall theme is pretty sporty here. You have paddle shifters on the steering wheel. You have the red center section on the steering wheel. You have some drive modes on the steering wheel that your regular F-150s didn't have. You also had some upfitter switches on here for lights or any other accessories you wanted to put onto the truck that didn't come standard. So overall, the layout on the Raptors is pretty much the same, but it does have a nice sporty interior on it compared to what a more basic standard F-150 would have. So final thoughts comparing the F-150 Raptor to a standard F-150. As you've seen, there are some very significant differences between the two trucks. And even though they're both considered F-150s, they're designed to do two very different tasks. Your standard F-150 is a good all-around workhorse that can do a lot of different things. Good towing capacity, good hauling capacity. It also can do some off-road, and it really works for the needs of a lot of different people in a lot of different tasks. Versus the Raptor, Ford had to make a lot of sacrifices, especially with that towing and payload capacity, in order for this truck to be able to go off-road at very high speed and do things off-road that a regular F-150 just cannot do, simply because it's designed to do so many different jobs. This is basically designed to do one specific task. It can do some of the things that a regular F-150 can do, a little bit of towing and payload, but it's primarily focused on that very high-speed off-road capability. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.